This is the Red Sea, and this the Gulf of Aden. This water connects some of the world's richest countries with some of the most troubled. The French have had a military base here since 1946, and the United States joined them in 2001. But then came Japan, then China, and suddenly it went really fast. The UAE built 7 bases along its shores in just 3 years. This made its rivals a little anxious. Qatar and Turkey formed an alliance and each expanded its influence. But then Russia came with the announcement that they were going to open 3 bases along its shores. This projection of power is happening in one of the world's most volatile regions and most important maritime choke points. This is great power politics in the Red Sea with Hindsight. The Red Sea connects the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean, and it facilitates the movement of about 10% of all global trade. On its seabed run a complex network of internet cables. This is used for private communication, but also for transactional communications and communicating sensitive intelligence. About 30% of people globally are estimated to rely on these cables for their internet access. The Suez Canal in Egypt is an economic lifeline for the country. Roughly 30% of Egypt's GDP is directly or indirectly coming from this canal. The port city of Eilat in Israel is the country's main hub for trade with the Far East. And Aqaba in Jordan is used for roughly 80% of the country's exports. Further to the south are Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia and Yemen, some of the most challenged countries in the world. Somalia has the longest shoreline in Africa, which is used by pirates. These acts of piracy were for many years the most acute regional security threat, but with the help of international navy patrols, this threat has been significantly reduced. So let's move on to the buildup of military bases. The oldest continued military base is from the French in modern-day Djibouti. This goes all the way back to the scramble of Africa. At that time, the British had already established several outposts in the region. The French were working alongside the British in excavating the Suez Canal, and they were expected to finish work in just a couple of years. But the French at that moment were using the British port of Aden to buy coal for their steamships, and this was an unwise dependency in the event of a war. So they established a colony on the other side of the channel to open their own coaling station. Fast forward until the end of the Second World War, this station was turned into a military base, which became the regional hub for operations by NATO and its allies. This location was chosen due to its geographic position. It borders the narrowest choke point, the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, which is only 28 kilometers wide. The large island at its center is part of Yemen. In 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, the United States opened a base in the region for its counter-terrorism operations, and they are situated just next to the French. For this, they pay a yearly sum of $63 million. Which is twice as much as that the French are paying. But they get access to the main airport and the city's port facilities. These bases were frequently used for joint operations with NATO members and its allies. Since 2009, the Japanese Navy actively participated in anti-piracy operations, but they saw that the Chinese were increasing their presence in the region. This presumably prompted the Japanese to open their own base in the country. This is the first permanent base of Japan in a foreign country since World War II, and not long thereafter, the Chinese indeed signed a deal with the Djibouti government. They too would open their first permanent base in a foreign country, and they are just 10 kilometers from the Americans. Anywhere between a few hundred to a few thousand soldiers are stationed here with the express purpose of protecting its regional economic interests. China is paying $20 million per year, and they signed a 10-year lease. But additionally, they agreed to invest over $500 million in the country over the next 25 years. The income that leasing this land to foreign governments is generating for Djibouti represents almost 5% of its entire GDP. But all these foreign governments that have stations here are all aiming to maintain regional security and protect economic interests. And they are quite frankly quite successful in reducing the threat of piracy and to improve the maritime security. That is, until 2014.
In more than 3 weeks of bombing, this was one of the largest attacks yet.
Allahu Akbar!
The war in Yemen sparked a massive militarization of the region, primarily by the United Arab Emirates, one of the main actors in the conflict. Between 2015 and 2017, they built 7 bases in the Horn of Africa, one of them on this island at the center of the strait. They were driven by regional security interests, but this militarization is also aligned with their goal to have greater influence over maritime trade. And then in 2017, Saudi Arabia announced that they were going to close all air, sea and land access to Yemen, which followed an attempted missile strike on its capital city. This blockade was intended at intercepting arms shipments and was supported by multiple allied nations, amongst them the UAE, who used its increased maritime power in the region to impose a naval blockade, and this made its rivals a little nervous. That same year was the diplomatic crisis with Qatar. The UAE became one of the Arab nations to sever ties with the country. Qatar relies strongly on its maritime trade. 98% of all liquefied natural gas that passes through the Red Sea is coming from Qatar. The UAE already projects power in one significant choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, and was now rapidly militarizing another. An ally of Qatar, Turkey, voiced critique of the UAE for its militarization of the Gulf of Aden. They formed an alliance with Qatar, and in the following months they both built their own regional presence. In 2018, Qatar signed a deal with the Sudanese government to invest $4 billion in developing the largest container port in the Red Sea. They then signed another deal with the government of Somalia, of which the details are not yet released. Turkey made its own deals to build a port in Sudan and a military training facility in Somalia. And then Russia came on stage, announcing the construction of a naval logistics center in Eritrea and a military base in Somalia, and another on the island of Socotra. This will be their first foreign naval base since the collapse of the Soviet Union. They are driven by the potential extraction of resources from Sudan, to control maritime trade in the event of a war with the West, and to cultivate the image of Russia being a global power. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden are becoming a theater of great power competition. This is playing out on the soil of already fragile nations who risk being drawn into political rivalries. The governments of these countries are accepting quick payments, and they neglect the long-term potential that the geostrategic location could have for developing their nation. This video here on the left is my personal suggestion for you to watch next. The one here on the right is YouTube's best bet for what you should watch next. Pick whichever one appeals to you most, and I'll see you there.